Hey everybody, this is Jason with Hurco Applications, and in this video we're going to go over the basics of working with DXF, 3D DXF, and solid model import on your WinMax control. Now in this video we're just going to cover the basics. We will do several more videos that get more in depth, but in this video we're just going to deal with the basics and how you work with the options. So to get started, the first thing we should note is all we are doing here is creating a conversational program. These are just tools to work as a shortcut to generating the conversational data blocks that you already know how to work with. The reason I bring that up is if you are looking at a print and you see a feature that cannot be created conversationally, that feature cannot be created with the DXF, 3D DXF, or the solid model import. There is one exception to that, which we will go over in a later video. But for the most part, just know that if you cannot create the feature with a conversational data block, it cannot be created with the import options. So let's go ahead and start a conversational program. Now that we have a new program created, everything else we're going to do is going to take place in our graphics screen. This is where we're going to work with the DXF and solid models. The first thing you'll notice is when we go into the graphics screen, we now have a couple additional panes. If you don't see these panes or toolbars, you'll notice we have these little arrows or carrots. We even have them on the graphics side. Just go ahead and select that area and that'll open up those toolbars. So over on the left, we have all the options and icons that we're going to use to create geometry, edit geometry, and select geometry. And just as important, down at the bottom, we have what I like to call the conversational area. When you're working with the import options, the more you look inside this conversational area, the easier of a time you're going to have with these options. This will give you a lot of information about what the control is asking for, or even display information about geometry that you selected on the screen. So to start working with this, we're going to go ahead and open up a file. We're going to import in a basic 2D DXF file. And to do that, I'm going to utilize this import icon down here in the lower portion of this toolbar. So I'm simply going to tell it I want to import. You'll notice when I do that, it's only bringing up DXF file extensions and step files. It's only going to let you see the type of file extension that it can open with this option. I'm going to choose this simple DXF file to start with. So here we have a simple DXF file on the screen. If I were to go over in my graphics, maybe put it in an isometric view, you can see this is definitely a 2D or two-dimensional DXF file. So we're not going to have to worry about any of the 3D options or selecting depth or anything like that. Just a basic DXF file. The first thing you may notice on this file is there is a lot of information on this screen that we simply don't need for what we're getting ready to work with. So to make this a little bit easier, a little bit more user-friendly, we're going to spend a little bit of time in the layers option in the lower left-hand corner. Now, down here in the layers, you'll notice I have several here. We have the slider bar if you can't see the entire list. This is going to bring in whatever layers were created in your DXF file. So the control will create some on its own. You can see we have this default layer, which is typically your part 0 marker or your gnomon. We have a simulation layer, which will be your graphics that you're already used to dealing with. And then we have in here, we have a stock geometry, which is just simply your stock geometry from your part setup. So you'll typically have those 3 layers along with any other layers that were created in that DXF file. You'll notice next to each layer, there's a little icon that looks like an eye. This is letting you know that that layer is visible. So what I could do is come in here and start selecting or deselecting these layers. And you'll notice when I select them, the eye goes away, puts a little square. That lets us know that that layer is not visible. It's still there. We just can't see it selected or do anything with it. So I could go through all these different layers and turn them all off and then start to turn them back on to see which layer I wanted to work with. To make that a little easier, I'm going to use this gear here, this gear icon, the settings icon. I'm going to open that up, and you notice we have several options to help work with your layers. One of them we have here is hide all layers. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and that's going to turn off every layer that's on the in the layer list. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just start to turn some of these back on. I'll go ahead and turn my default layer and my simulation layer back on. And then I can just select each layer and see if it's useful or not. If I page through here, I believe this is the layer I want, this DWG. You can see now I have just the geometry that I want to work with on the screen. So I'm probably going to leave the rest of those layers turned off. Another icon that you may notice here is the icon that indicates which layer is active, or the layer that you're currently going to be adding geometry to or editing. I'm going to go ahead and set that to the same layer that I have active just by selecting the box next to the layer. So now this is saying that that DWG layer is active, it's visible, and that is my active layer. Any edits will take place on that layer. Another useful feature is just to the right of the layer name. You can see we have this color. If you happen to have a color on the screen that maybe you can't see real well, you can just go ahead and select that area, select the color you want, and it'll change that geometry for you. Actually, that looks pretty good. I think I'll go ahead and leave it at that color, but you can make that whatever you want, whatever is visually easy for you to see. So that was a little bit with working with the layers. I think we'll stop with the layers there for now and go into how we select geometry. This is probably going to be the first thing that you'll need to master to get real good with the import options. And that's just simply, how do you select geometry? And we have a few different ways of doing that. In this left toolbar up towards the top, you'll see we have two main options. We have the Select Pick tool, which allows you to select individual pieces of geometry. You just go in and select individual. Or we have the Select box. Some will call this a window select box, but this allows you to select a lot of geometry at one time. So depending on what you're trying to do, one may be easier than the other. This brings up another good point. Anytime you see this cancel option down here show up, that means something has been selected on the screen, or you're in the middle of an operation. Anytime you want to deselect or cancel what you're doing, just go ahead and hit that option. It'll cancel out everything that is active. Can be a pretty useful feature. So now let's talk a little bit about how we can further define what we're going to get with our select options. You'll notice just below these two main icons, we have several checkboxes that we can either select or deselect, and these will change how we're going to work with selecting our geometry. The first one is visible only. This is primarily going to be used in solid model import. What this allows you to do, or what you're telling the control here, is you only want to select geometry that you can see in the view you're looking at. So if you were to use the window box, you're not going to be selecting surfaces that are below the surfaces you're working on and that kind of thing. It's only going to select the geometry that is visible in the view you're working in. So that's usually a pretty handy one to have on. Just below this, we have multi-selection. You'll notice when I'm selecting with multi-selection turned off, I'm only getting one piece of geometry at a time. Every time I select the next piece of geometry, you can tell by the color here, it goes ahead and deselects the last piece of geometry. If I want it to remember that previous selection, I just turn on my multi-selection. Now it's going to remember everything I select. So now you notice everything I select is being added to a list, you could say there, but it is going to select all that geometry. So I'll go ahead and use the cancel to cancel that out now. The next one, and one you will use quite often, is chain selections. This works very similar to multi-selection. When I turn on my select tool and I select a piece of geometry, it is now going to select the entire chain, or every piece of geometry that is connected to that geometry I just selected. So it allows you to get complex contours very quickly. If I wanted to get this center geometry, I can just go ahead and select that. It's going to get the whole thing because chain selections was turned on. Go ahead and cancel that, and I think I'll leave those two on. The next option can be very useful as well, but it's also one that you have to watch. If you turn this on and forget, it can cause you a little bit of headache down the road, and that is filter circle radius. So what this does is this tells the control we only want to select geometry with a given radius. Very helpful for using your window select box and selecting an entire part and pulling all of the holes of the same size out. But basically tells the control only look at geometry with a given radius. Now, there's two ways we can tell it what radius we want to select. The first thing I'm going to do is kind of the manual way. We're just going to go in and type in the radius that we want to select. To do that, I'm going to open up this settings area. You can select with this icon here. And this is going to open up a bunch of settings, which we'll go into more detail in later videos. But for this video here, we are going to utilize the filter circle radius field that's right here at the top. So if I wanted to go ahead and let's say I just wanted to select these 4 outer holes, those were the only holes I wanted to get, I just need to enter the radius of those holes in this field. Well, right now, I really don't know what those radius values are. So one thing we can do, and this brings up a real handy feature within the import options, if I select on some geometry, down at the bottom in the conversational area, it's going to extract all the information it can based on that geometry I selected. So if I look down here, it's giving me some center points, a Z position. If this were a 3D DXF, it would have some more information there. But it's also giving me the radius of this circle. So I can see we have a 1/4 inch radius. So one way to select or to set this filter circle radius would just be to go type a 1/4 inch into that filter circle radius field. So that's the manual way of setting it. We have another, a little bit more convenient way of setting that. You'll notice that as long as our select pick tool is active, let me go ahead and cancel so I don't have that hole selected. I'm going to open it back up. If you select a hole or geometry, and let me select a different hole so we can see it change. If I go in and select this circle here, since there is a radius associated with that, this set R or set radius field now becomes active. So I can go ahead and select that, and you may have noticed that filter circle radius just changed in your settings. So this is just a shortcut to setting that value there. So even if you didn't know these settings existed, you could still set and select multiple holes of a given radius. So that is your filter circle radius. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on and point out one other feature with the filter circle radius. Because if you do leave this active, it is only looking for geometry with a given radius. That can be a little bit of a headache if you leave that active and forget that you've done so. Because of that, it's going to give you this little addition to your cursor. It's going to give you this little funnel icon to let you know you are filtering your results. You're not looking at everything. You're now only looking for given radiuses. So if you ever see that icon next to your cursor, it's just letting you know that your filter circle radius is selected. Since it is on, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my select box. Drag a window. You notice I still have the icon. Let me know I'm filtering. But now when I select this entire part, you notice I only get the geometry with the radius we specified. So I'll go ahead and cancel that. Now that we kind of know how to select geometry, let's go ahead and we'll create a simple data block just to show you how the process goes. But before we do that, we need to talk about the most important step in working with any DXF or solid model. And that is making sure your part 0 is sitting where you want it to be on the part. So whatever location you plan to go find at your machine, you need to make sure you set that here on your DXF file or solid model before creating your data blocks. That's what all the information is going to be based on. So although we're going to cover this in more detail in future videos, we're going to go ahead and show you how to quickly do that. I'm going to utilize this Move Part 0 option over here in the Actions area. And I'm also going to utilize the Snap options. We'll talk a little bit more about these again in a future video, primarily the Snap to Grid, where we're having to edit and do those kind of things. But for now, I'm just going to utilize the Snap to Object. I'm going to turn that on, and essentially when you turn this on, you are telling the control, I only want you to snap or jump to or focus on whatever I select in this drop-down menu. So in this case here, I want to put my Part 0 right on the corner here. So then rather than hope I get that corner, I'm going to use my snap options. I'm going to turn it on, tell it I only want to look at endpoints. And I'm just going to go ahead, and you'll notice now that it's skipping all the other features and just kind of jumping to the endpoints. This is going to ensure that I get the endpoint of one of these two lines. So I'll go ahead and select that. You'll notice my Part 0 is now sitting on the corner of the part. Again, probably the most important step in working with DXF or solid model. Once you create your data block, it is going to be based off that Part 0 marker. So make sure to set that before creating any geometry. So now that we have that set, we can go ahead and start creating some geometry. I'm going to use my Select Pick tool. I will leave multi-selection on, chain selections on, and I'm going to deselect the filter circle radius, and I'm just going to grab this outer frame. So now when I go to grab this, you notice that it's still trying to jump to the endpoints. That is fine. It would still select that geometry. If I want to turn it off, I just come back to my snap options and deselect that field there. So now I can just come in, I'll just select on this outer frame. You'll notice because chain was on, it grabbed the whole thing. And then over in my create options, you'll now notice we have several icons that are now lit up or active. These are all the different features or data blocks that the control thinks I may be wanting to create based on the geometry that I selected. So we have a few here that are going to be pretty standard, what you're used to in your typical conversational. And we have a couple others that may be new to you. The first one here is a frame. That's what we are going to use here. It also saw that we might want to create a contour with this. If we wanted to create a lines and arcs data block, we could go ahead and select that option. And we also have a newer feature here, a bounding frame. This will create a frame that will be larger than all the geometry you program. So if you wanted to use it as an island, or I'm sorry, a boundary, and use it to face off material, you could do something like that there. And also we have this 3D mold. This is going to come up with almost any geometry that you select. However, this will probably be the least commonly used data block that you're going to create out of the DXF or solid model import options. So I'm going to simply go ahead and select the frame that we want to create here. Down in the conversational area, again, make sure to look down there often. It's asked me to please click on the top of the feature for Z Start. We've already mentioned that this was a 2D DXF, so there is really no Z information to pull out of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit the green approve check mark next to the cancel. And you'll notice it came up and told me that my DXF or 3D block was inserted at the end of my program. If I hit my review button, you can see there's the mill frame we created. Because this is a 2D DXF, it did not bring in anything with the Z start or Z bottom, so I would need to enter that information as well as tell it what tool I wanted to use and my cutter comp or milling type. So I'm going to go ahead and cut on the outside. Now that we have all that information entered, if I go ahead and hit the draw or play in my graphics, you'll see that we now have the graphics overlaid right over the DXF file. So it's all still right in there. If your graphic starts to get to be too much, it's a little hard to see here, you can either just clear your graphics or again hide the simulation layer over in your layers. So that's it for the basic functioning of the DXF, 3D DXF, and solid model import. Be sure to watch the following videos for more details on how to work with the options.